topics and questions. All right. Let's see. I'm going to try to get. Oh, never mind. That's fine. Here you can see the pile of gear in the middle of the Zodiac. There's 6 of us or 5 of us sitting around, and I'll show a few more of those pictures as we go through some of those slides. Conditions. So all diving, and you can see Martina and I always look goofy with a lot of gear on. All diving's done from the Zodiac. So the Zodiac will take you to the dive site from the big ship. You'll put on your units and you back roll into the ice cold water. And then at the end, and that's the part that's a little bit tricky, is you have to get on the Zodiac over the side of the Zodiac. What happens is you hand your scuba tank and BC to the boat driver. They'll take it in, and then you essentially, in a concerted effort, use your fins and upper arms to get yourself at least on the side of the Zodiac, and then your fellow divers will pull you up by literally the seat of your dry suit pants. It's very remote, so the diving has to be very conservative. There's no chamber on the ship, or not even an emergency chamber that you would have with some of the more technical expeditions. And the agreement is to not dive below 20 meters, 60 feet. And we stayed in the water less than 40 minutes, mostly because of the thermal aspect of the diving. It got cold after 30, 35 minutes, and you need to come out mostly because you can't really feel your hands anymore and operate the equipment safely. Temperatures ranged from 28 to 35 degrees. It's fascinating that it can go below freezing because the water is actually very salty. So at 28, it's not frozen. And what's also fascinating is you can tell the difference between 35 degrees, 33 degrees, 30 degrees. I would have not believed that. I would have thought everything is very cold, but at the end, I thought 35 is an okay dive, but 29 was definitely cold. For reference, a balmy day in Monterey is 55, and probably the worst day I've seen temperature-wise in Monterey might have been 45, plus minus. In order to be actually able to dive at temperatures like that, a dry suit is absolutely mandatory. You'll see some videos of people doing short dives in 7 mils, some cameramen that jump in to get that elusive shot because they need to fin quickly with their free diving fins or something like that, but that's not something that you could dive for much more than 10 or 15 minutes. So you're required to have a dry suit. You're required to have thick undergarments. They should be Thinsulate or something that still stays a little bit warm if you were to get flooded, because in those temperatures it really matters. Dry gloves are strongly encouraged. I don't think anyone on the dive actually had wet gloves, but I hear in the past some people had very thick wet gloves, and that kind of worked as well. Most people ended up having, and that's why the batteries there, ended up having heated undergarments. They will take the edge off even a little bit more. And I have to say, we got those for the trip to Antarctica with the rationale that we're actually also going to use them here. And now it's really fantastic to dive here with heated undergarments because now it's actually very warm and cozy. So that was a nice upgrade that I don't think we would have ever gotten if we didn't go to Antarctica. Most people dove a 10 or 11 millimeter hood that was nicely sealed, and you want to get as little of your face as possible exposed because it really gets cold in the face. Some people had a nicely fitting 7 millimeter hood, and that worked quite well too, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, but that might be something I would possibly try out in the future too. And then both Blue-Green Expeditions and Becky, they'll require you to have, I believe, at least 50 dry suit dives. So this is not one of those dives like in Iceland where you're a great open water diver. You take the dry suit certification and you dive sill front. That's all safe. They want you to be comfortable with limited dexterity and movement in a dry suit with thick undergarment because you need to be fairly independent in slightly rough conditions. And as with most dives, you're required to bring, or with most dive trips, you're required to bring all your own gear except for weights and tanks. And then technically speaking, on the first day that you arrive in Antarctica, there's a checkout dive to get the weighting right. And technically speaking, if they realized someone is not safe to dive, that will be still an opportunity to say you can't scuba. You're possibly only allowed to snorkel. I don't think that certainly did not happen in our group, and I think from hearsay that might have happened once or twice in the last 10 years or so. So you need to be comfortable in a dry suit with thick undergarment in order to be diving those conditions safely. Generally speaking, the setup, and I'll show some photos in a moment, you're diving open circuit with a single tank. Those are 12-liter high pressure tanks. They're pretty close to our steel high pressure 100s that a lot of people dive around here. The one thing that is different is it has an H valve, so one cylinder with two valves, and I'll show a photo in a moment. And so you have two first stages and two second stages, because in those conditions, free flows due to freezing are actually something that can happen. I will say during our trip, we did not have a single free flow. So with modern gear, and I'll get to that in a second too, and good setup and a little bit of a good practice, you're pretty safe, but it's definitely one of those areas where two first and second stages are warranted. You're essentially diving a double setup with a single tank. Most people used a wing and backplate setup. We did have, I would say maybe 10 or 15% of divers that used jacket style BCDs. And of note, those are cold water divers from Canada, Northeast, and that's what they dive back home. So it's not by all means a requirement to have a backplate or wing. So people can definitely dive with different setups. And for reference, people put on between about 30 and 35 pounds. I would say that's about the mean of weight added to the entire setup. Here are a few pictures of some of the setups. In the middle, you see the H valve, which is essentially a regular single tank valve that has an additional opening added on the stem side with its own shutoff valve. And then on the right side, you see the type of regulator that's preferred. It has to be environmentally sealed. So it can't be, for example, a lot of people dive Scuba Pro MK25s, and you can actually see the internals of the regulator, which is really cool, and you can clean it nicely. But that would be something that's very prone to freezing. So non-sealed units are not allowed. And I believe generally diaphragm regulators are more robust when it comes to performing in extreme environments. And what you see is what about 50 or 60% of the people dove, which is the Apex MTXR, especially designed cold water regulator. For us, it was sort of time to get new regulators, so we actually had to invest in 4 of these. I have to say, I really liked them, but as regulators, couldn't be happier with them, but would have not bought them if we didn't go to Antarctica. And then on the left side, you can see the whole setup assembled. You essentially have the 2 separate first stages. From each, you have a second stage. If one of the first stages free flows, you can switch over to the other one. And then on the other side, from each first stage, you have an inflation device, one for the dry suit, the other one for the buoyancy control device. So if you lose one first stage, you still have buoyancy with the other side. And then that was slightly fascinating to me. This is actually Becky's unit and a picture she sent before we assembled everything. The electronic transmitter, the Shearwater Swift, works perfectly fine. I was actually surprised at that. And that made things a lot more simple. We also took our Shearwaters, and it's really nice to just have it at the pressure on your console and not having to fumble with the thick undergarments and the gauge as you're taking photos. So that is something that I really like, that it also worked well in those environments. A little bit of a overview on how these things then looked on a day-to-day basis. That's the bow of the ship. they were able to stage 3 Zodiacs there. So you would prepare your units, your BC, with the tank and your fins, and then they would load them into the Zodiacs, use a crane, and get the Zodiacs to the side of the boat, not with the divers in, but just the captain of the little boats. And then we would go down the stairs. Most people took their cameras with them and then sat down on the side of the Zodiacs in order to get to the dive site. This is a really nice shot of Henrik, who led the dive operations for Ocean Wide. Swedish Navy diver for 20 years, has been diving polar regions for 20 years. Very experienced, very nice person, very helpful in finding good dive sites, finding icebergs that are safe to dive because they have to be beached on the ground below. You don't want them to be turning as you're near them and so forth. So we were super grateful to have Henrik help and facilitate our diving. In the ship, there was a room where we could hang up our dry suits overnight for them to dry a little bit out. The dive units we essentially left out on the deck. They were secured, so they would not tumble around, but they were exposed to any weather there was. But that was not a big problem. We just had to make sure to tuck away some of the second stages so there people would not, trip over them that went to the bow to take some pictures. Off to the side of the ship, below the main deck, there was a little bit of an area that we as divers could use to get suited up. It was really nice and comfortable. People, Faith, for example, from Blue Green would help us, tuck in our hoods as we lost dexterity, putting on dry suits and so forth. So it was a really nice little area to get dressed. One thing I'll note, and I can use the next slide for this as well. One thing I probably do differently next time is a lot of people who've done this before, and there's a lot of repeat offenders that have been to Antarctica or the Arctic. They use those glove systems where you can actually take the glove off, the dry glove, and operate an iPhone or a land topside camera as you're in the Zodiac, and then just put on their dry gloves before they get into water. Which is very handy. And we had the permanently attached Ziploc gloves that we could not really take off and put on before diving. So I think that was one of the things that was that I might try out differently this time. This gives you a little bit of an impression of what it looks like. So you hold your camera between your legs or somewhere on the ground where it's somewhat safe, and then you get to the dive site. You get into your scuba gear before you do your backwards roll. Martina and I in front of the ship, happy before our first dive, I believe. And here you also just get a little bit of an impression of when it moves around, what it looks like. Henrik looking for an iceberg for us, slowly approaching a dive site before we then hop in. We have a nice little sequence, everybody geared up. And it takes a little moment to get geared up, and people are very helpful, but it definitely takes about 10 or 15 minutes until everybody's ready to go in. And then once you're ready, you're not supposed to breathe your regulator in the air, because the first stage actually gets a lot colder than it does when submerged underwater, and it could actually free flow if it's really cold. Didn't happen. And you can see me in the back right. I'm trying to do the right thing and not have the regulator already in my mouth breathing, but everybody else did, and nobody else was free float. So I started doing that later on too. But essentially, you count down and you drop back into the water, and then you settle in. One last check, and you see the beautiful iceberg to the side before you then, push the button on the BC and go down. Which would lead me to the transition below water with some photos and a few thoughts on that. And I just put a few things on a slide that I think might be worthwhile quickly talking about. And again, if you have questions, feel free to jump in anytime. Generally speaking, most people took photos, not a lot of video taking. One of the reasons I would say, and you'll see it and I'll point it out on some of the photos, the visibility was actually quite variable. One would think those are crystal clear waters, but they're not. Around icebergs that melt, you have a lot of gas that actually comes out of the iceberg, a little bit like a mineral water bottle or champagne bottle that keeps bubbling all the time. And then there's a lot of microorganisms in the water that, are good food for other people, but create a lot of backscatter for us, and visibility is a little bit of an issue. So videos um, are a little bit more of a secondary product of being underwater. I would say photography is the main thing. Nonetheless, it's very convenient to have a GoPro. You can stick it underwater from the boat. You can take a short little video here or there, and they're super convenient. And actually, the batteries work quite well. That was one of the things some people said, oh, the batteries will die after 5 minutes in the water. We had batteries that were maybe 1 or 2 years old, and I cannot say that I had any issues either with the camera or the GoPro. Beyond, I didn't even notice a big difference as far as how long the batteries lasted. And then outside of the GoPro, any underwater system to take photos will work quite well. A lot of people had mirrorless, some people had DSLRs, a couple of micro four thirds. So whatever you're comfortable with works perfectly well in Antarctica as well. A few words about lighting. The majority of photos you will actually probably do very close to the surface. And for the reason of the visibility that we just talked about, there's a good amount of backscatter. So I would say ambient light is your friend and actually creates a lot of good photos. And if push comes to shove and you don't have any space for your big flashes to take with you, that works perfectly well. That said, some people had video lights that they turned on and off for some things that they wanted a little bit of light on, including some of the macro photography. And some people have flashes. We have flashes, but quite frankly, most of the time, 90% of the time, I just carry them around, and maybe for a few macro shots that we took, we used them. But that's pretty much it, because you also don't have that much time to play around with a little bit more flash from the right or left or move it around because it's cold and you want to move on a little bit. You want to take some photos. So it was interesting to see. So ambient light, most of the photos, video lights are not too bad. And then flash is something that can be used, but not necessarily a must unless you're doing macro. Next part, and then I'll have good examples or some examples of all of those. I think generally speaking, there's three types of photos, underwater photos that you can take in Antarctica really well. One is splits, so overwater, underwater. Another one is generally speaking wide angle photography, and then surprisingly you can do macro. And I'll show you one of the other passengers' macro photos because Martina and I did not take a macro lens because as first timers we thought, the money's in the wide angle stuff. So with that, let's dive into some of the macro or some of the splits actually. And here you can see Martina bobbing around with the snorkel, doing what she really likes doing most, which is split shots. And I thought this is a really cool little video because it gives you a good sort of impression of what it looks like. What's actually really nice with the dry suit and the thick undergarment, you have so much flotation that it doesn't matter how heavy your rig is, you can easily pull it a little bit out of the water in and out. Whereas sometimes when you're in the tropics trying to do splits and you're just in your swim trunks, you almost you're halfway drowning. So that was very easy, but it also got cold quickly on the surface. And then these are the types of shots you get. And I think they're really cool because they combine above and below water. And then especially with the icebergs, you get the tip of the iceberg phenomenon where there's like that beautiful little tip that's sticking out, but then there's this gorgeous, huge, body of ice underwater, and you get those like different colors. So a lot of people that look at those really like them. Martina really likes taking them. And I really do think they give an interesting picture of Antarctica. It's also always cool to have a diver or a human being in the picture, give a little perspective, because some of the icebergs are humongous and some of the icebergs are a little bit smaller. But those are definitely also cool pictures. Here's me as a model for Martina taking some of the photos. And here's another cool one. Here we have Martina jumped in the water every time from the Zodiac when there was a good opportunity to take a split shot. And this was really cool because she saw two penguins on an iceberg, and she really wanted to get a photo of that. So this is the image of Martina, and this is Martina's image that she took in that moment with the two little penguins sitting on top of the iceberg, which is this is about as Antarctic as it gets. You have some of the big icebergs on the right side, you have some land on the left side, and then you have the below water, and you have the penguins on top of an iceberg. Very recognizable. But this is also a very good image. You can see how close Martina was to the iceberg, and if you look at the visibility underwater, you can see how backscatter and being close to your subject is really important. The farther you're away, the trickier it gets. So you almost have to guess where it starts and stops the iceberg here, and then this is what the diver looks like, happy after getting a good shot. And then here are some more photos of some icebergs below above, and you could really see the underwater pollution, so to speak, in some of those. And in some of them it's a little bit less, and in some of them it's a little bit more, but it's just majestic with those beautiful skies, the shapes of the ice above water, below water. And then again, it's really cool. That's me as a snorkeler to get a little bit of perspective of what the size of those icebergs are. And then another one here. And then as I'm starting this video, one thing that's obligatory is that everybody get on an iceberg that's deemed to be safe to get on. For a group photo, and then B, also a polar plunge with dry suit, which is a lot easier than polar plunge that the other passengers on the boat did. So this is our little iceberg, and this is where the GoPro comes in handy. And you can see some of our other friends from the boat that are doing the mini version of the polar plunge. And then Martina and I also have to do it. And it's a lot of fun because only your face gets cold for a moment. And then we swim along the iceberg once more. You see underwater all those beautiful reflections, all those shapes. And then in a moment, I think you'll see Hendrik with the boat coming to pick us up, making sure we stay safe. And I think before or after, this is Becky's little group. We all went on the iceberg for the obligatory group photo that Henrik took of us. So that's a pretty cool thing to do. And all the other groups, the little dive groups, also did those. Wide angle photography, I think there's a lot of subjects to do that. That was initially sort of our primary goal. And then, of course, the splits was something we really wanted to try to do. There's a number of setups that will work well. We took our fisheye, so all the split shots we did with a fisheye and the 230 millimeter. I think that's something between 8 or 9 inches. Glass dome, because that one has a decent size, so you can have, even if the sea is not super calm, you can have a little bit of control of the horizon. The smaller the dome gets, the harder it gets to get a decent horizon for a split shot. That said, if you just want to take your fisheye underwater, we found that the 140 millimeter dome, I think that's probably something around 6 inches, works really well, actually. And the sharpness in the corners is not that much of an issue these days anymore. But anyways, we took a good amount of photos underwater with the 230 millimeter dome and the fisheye. Other people used rectilinear lenses behind domes, so 14 to 24, mostly I would say 16 to 35. That was one of the lenses that you would see quite frequently. My favorite lens for rectilinear and wide angle is the WACP with the, 28 to 70 kit lens behind. Field of view, I think, is about 100 to 140 degrees. It's really cool because you can zoom in a little bit, and I actually took a couple of sort of close focus, wide angle, macro type of shots. So it's a very versatile lens to do this type of photography. And with that said, one of the holy grails of pictures is to try to get a leopard seal. Full disclosure, we did not get a photo of a leopard seal, but I'm able to show you some of Becky's and a little bit of what it looked like out of the water. Actually, on our very first checkout dive, we run into leopard seals. Leopard seals can be anything from as friendly as a dog to chasing away a zodiac by biting into it, being very territorial. The guides, Henrik, um, gauge the animal's behaviors and let us in, or will take us out, or will not let us in. And it's supposedly very safe. I know that there's that one fatality of a British diver, and the British explorations are not allowed to go into the water when there's a leopard seal. But I think that if you look at a little bit the accident analysis, that looks to have been a combination of things that contributed to that person's unfortunate death. Um, so I had some respect when I saw the leopard seal. The other problem was we already did the checkout dive, and we were pretty cold, so we got out of the water, we got back into the water, had a hard time manipulating the camera. But Becky got close to the leopard seal, and that's her that you see from behind with the camera kind of sticking out of the water a little bit. And I'll show a couple of more photos. And I really like this one. You can see the diver's thighs that are a lot closer to the camera than the leopard seal. It's fascinating to see how large that animal is. Look at the head of the leopard seal. It must be 4 times the size of one of those human heads, if not bigger. People on the boat said that was probably about a 4,000 pound leopard seal. So a very incredible animal to just see. And I was right behind. This is not my photo, but I was about in that spot with my camera trying to get a photo of the leopard seal, but also not trying to put the camera really in the leopard seal's face, because you're supposed to hang out and wait for it to come towards you. And for Becky, that you just saw in the other photo, that was about 3 to 4 feet away, the leopard seal came by a few times, and they're very curious. It's very cute to see. And I saw the leopard seal come by a few times too. I took a number of photos, and I could show you a picture where you sort of are able to you could tell it's a leopard seal, but that's about as good as it gets. In those waters, and you can see the iceberg behind, that's just literally 3 feet behind. The waters are so murky for all the microorganisms and the bubbles in it that this leopard seal needed to be about 1 to 2, maybe 3 feet away from the camera to be able to take a photo like this one. They're super beautiful animals, and it was lovely to see them. We never saw them again as divers in the water. We saw them out of the water. We saw them swimming around, but they're very beautiful animals. And since it was the first encounter, I had a lot of respect with that story in the back of my mind. But it was wonderful to just be in the water. As a photographer, I'm slightly bummed I didn't get the shot or a shot, but need a good reason to go back. So that there it is. Another fantastic subject are icebergs. And I really love the icebergs underwater. And this is one of my favorite photos Martina took of myself. This is probably about 40 feet down next to a big iceberg that's beached on the ground. So you could see the actual ground below, which was around 60 feet. And so we swam circles around this iceberg. It's beautiful to see the structure it has from the melting. You can touch it, as hard as a rock and slippery, and it's just gorgeous to see, and it's just gorgeous to be next to it. So we took some photos of each other next to the iceberg. We took some photos looking up of the iceberg with the structures, and this is me taking a photo of Martina from slightly below. And then I also, for reference, Becky was around the corner on the other side. She took some photos of her dive partner, Rick, a little bit more shallow. Wanted to share those as well. So you get a little bit of an impression of what some different angles are like and what it looks like. Lastly, I'll get to macro opportunities. And before we went, I didn't even think about macro, but there's lots of interesting stuff to see. There's some walls. There's some ground you can explore, and you see a lot of interesting creatures. Now, please don't ask me. I cannot tell you what they all are. What I can tell you is this was taken with the WACP on the, so to speak, long end, so at 70 millimeters, about 100 degrees of field of view, with, I believe, just one of the flashes on from the left side. But it was really cool to see some of those structures on the ground. And I actually only spent, sadly, one dive exploring that a little bit. That's another one of our pictures, a little bit of a below water seascape macro with a few of those little critters. We did have one passenger on the boat that dove with us. His name's Mike Williams. And I asked both Becky and Mike whether it's okay to share those images, and they said absolutely. Mike and his dive buddy actually set out to do mostly macro photography, and then they shared their images, and it was really cool to see them. And on the right side, that's also Mike's photo of his dive buddy. You can see what it looks like, and it reminds me a little bit of Monterey on a bad day. A little gloomy, a little green, but lots of cool things to see, especially if you get close. This was a really cool thing that Mike captured within sort of the seaweed on the ground, and a little bit of more of a close-up, and nobody knew what it is. And this photo has been sent to scientists, and this is a new creature. So for the first time, this animal, sea creature, has been photographed, and I think there's one or two others that during this trip people recognized as something new. So I think that's another really cool feature of diving in Antarctica. It has a little bit something of an exploration. You're going somewhere and you're taking photos of things that not a lot of people have photographed or seen before. So I think that's really cool too. And then some more of Mike's photos, some anemones, some little fish, different angles. You can play with the light. Those isopods, the biggest ones that we saw were like the size of a human head. It was like a little bit scary to get too close to them because you felt like, you know, an alien's going to come out of them. But it was really cool to see them, and they're super cool macro subjects, beautiful sea stars, and then the types of shrimps, krill, and fish. So I'm convinced next time we would go to the Antarctic, we're definitely going to bring a macro setup, and I'll go look for some of those creatures as well. I think I probably have some fun with that as well. Last few minutes, I'll spend a little bit of time on the above water photography and opportunities, because I think it's actually absolutely fantastic and just worthwhile a trip for the above water components. And I tried to group them a little bit. There's photos to be taken from the ship, there's photos to be taken from the Zodiac, and then there's some landings to just give you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like. As we left Ushuaia, you go through the Beagle Channel, so you still see land on the left and right before you get into the Drake's Passage. And literally about half an hour into our journey, we see this 180-degree rainbow, and we have to go out and take a picture because that's really cool to see that. And like that, there's lots of opportunities. The ship's really cool because it has a lot of space. Even if all the people are out, you can imagine there's plenty of space for people to just share good angles. And the sunrises and sunsets are just super beautiful, or have the potential with some clouds to be super beautiful every single time. This is also still in the Beagle Channel as we're leaving the first night, and we have a beautiful sunset, and we're out taking pictures. A little bit later in the trip, we see some icebergs. I think this is later in the day, getting closer to the evening. Really nice skies coming and going, makes for great sort of perspective and textures. The sunrises are absolutely stunning. They're a little bit early. They happen between 4 and 5 a.m. If you're able to get up, the other cool thing is you're the only person up because everybody else is still sleeping. So we would get up early pretty much most of the days when there's ice around and try to take photos. And it was absolutely beautiful. Slightly cold, as you can tell by Martina's gear on. One thing that's super helpful was those gloves that have like fingers that you can flip back and flip back front again, because that way you could keep your hands a little bit warm. Pictures you can take are icebergs and what I would call iceberg scapes. And it's just stunning to see the shapes and structures of those icebergs. even on an overcast day when the sky's gray, they look blue. You can zoom out a little bit, have a little bit more perspective. When you have a sky and many of them, you have a little bit more of a landscape type of setup. Some images from those beautiful sunrise mornings when you essentially have gold hour and blue hour and everything in one picture is absolutely fascinating. And it's interesting to see the icebergs then look white and like, shining white. So it's really beautiful to see them in different light with different skies. And again, just for those above water photos, I think the trip's worth it. Different times of day, different skies, different lighting, different proximity to the iceberg from the ship. Then this is a big panorama that also kind of shows everything from blue to white to red to pink and yellow. You also see a good number of animals. There's a little bit more luck involved. You see orcas. We didn't bring super long lenses. A 70-200 was the longest we brought. Some people had something in the vicinity of 100-400 or 200-600, which I think could be very useful lenses if you'd like to spend a little bit more time topside. And then there's always a guy or a person with a 600 that's lugging that one around. They got some good shots too, but they also missed some shots because it's quite a big setup to handle around on a boat. We did see some orcas. Some of them came close. Most of them were quite a bit in the distance. We saw a good number of humpback whales as well. They make for really nice sort of animal scapes as well. When you have a little bit of a tail fluke in front of a little bit of an iceberg. Sometimes you might even get a little bit of setting sunlight on them. And then we didn't spend too much time with it, but there's a good number of birds you can also take photos of. Albatross, different kinds of albatross that on the Drake's Passage you see a lot of, and also when you're down in Antarctica. And then when you have that beautiful sun setting, that warm light hitting them from the right side, they're just very beautiful animals to take photos of as well. From the Zodiacs, you can take really good photos as well. You're closer to the water, so you have a different angle. And this is what it looks like when you don't dive. You put a few more people on the Zodiac. You need to get some warm clothes because it is a little bit chilly. And then that's when most people had their 70-200s or 100-400s on to try to get some photos. Martina and I usually split up. One person takes a 24-70 to take a little bit more of landscape photos, and the other person gets the 70-200 to try to get some of the animals or more abstract portions of maybe icebergs. Another group photo. And here are some of those photos that we've taken with the camera, icebergs from different angles, close proximity. You see some nice structures, some interesting shapes. You get nice reflections. Sometimes the sea is very calm. It's also cool to have a little bit of a Zodiac in front of that big iceberg to get perspective again. Reflections of an iceberg up close. Here you see through an iceberg that's melting. You're very close to it. You can hear it crack. You can even hear the bubbles as they come out of the water. You get really cool structures as you get close to them. And then, you get the nice resolution of the camera and you can geek out on a pixel level as to how cool those structures of the ice look. Then you see your buddy, the leopard seal again, resting and trying to be safe from orcas on a piece of ice. You can cruise around them and get some nice looks at them, get some good shots of them. And again, that's taken with 200 millimeters. So you can imagine that you're very close to them. You can smell them. All those animals smell quite terribly, but you forget about that quite quickly. It's interesting. The leopard seals can look anything from very, very cute to very, very scary. So it's kind of fun to capture those emotions of the leopard seals. And then, of course, you see penguins. You can do some penguinscapes or integrate the penguins into your photos of the ice. Those little guys have a nice little haircut. A Weddell seal with those little spots on it. Very elusive in the water because they're very skittish. They end up being everybody's sort of prey. So you probably almost see them only on ice, but they're very cute too. And again, as you're out with the Zodiac, lots of birds. You can take some photos of birds with ice, or you can, if you're able to not fall in the water and try to follow some of the birds, you can get some good shots as they're flying over the kayak and actually attacking you, sort of at least by noise, because you're getting too close, or they always think you're too close. They're trying to not get too close to their babies, but they're still very territorial. Lastly, last 2 or 3 minutes, I'll show you a few photos of what it looks like when you go on land. I actually took a little video. This is Martina and I after a dive, and the guides are super great. You can tell them after a dive, what they will tell you that there's a good little spot to get to. Do you want to go see? And then you drop off your scuba tank and they drop you off on land for maybe half an hour, whereas the rest of the group spend 2 hours on land. But this is what it looks like a little bit behind the scenes. You have a few penguins. They really don't mind that you're there. They're walking around. And also answering the question, you can operate a mirrorless camera with dry gloves. It works really well. And it's super cool to just be there, see the penguins. And you can see this is a little bit more of a typical Antarctica day, a little drizzly, a little cold. And a lot of people spend hours with penguins like that all day. And it is really cool. And these are the types of photos you can get. Those were photos taken right there. They're super cute. They have cute little eyes and expressions. The pebbles on the ground are beautiful. You see all their little hairs, and it's just it's very cool to just see them and being able to hang out with them and take some of those photos. On the nose, it's 8 o'clock. I have not rehearsed that, but it worked out quite well. Any questions you have? Any thoughts? Any feedback? I'd love to hear.
And remember to unmute yourself to ask a question. Marc, that was awesome.
I can't hear you, Paul. Maybe. Hold on.
How about now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
I was just going to say it was a great talk. The photographs are incredible. I have a question about the penguins. So the seals eat the penguins, no?
That's correct. Yes, especially the leopard seals. And there was 1 or 2 dives where we saw penguin pieces floating in the water, because what they do is they shake him to death, eat him, and then there's some feathers that are still there. And I think Becky on the next trip a couple of months later essentially witnessed an encounter where a penguin was caught. And then there's from Amos Nachum, who's down in Monterey. There's that famous photo of essentially him next to the leopard seal, and the leopard seal brings Amos the penguin and say, "You poor guy don't know how to hunt. Here, start with the dead one." So that's that iconic photo.
Do the seals try to eat them when they're out of the water, or only in the water?
I think it's mostly in the water, and then like some of the orcas, they kind of use maybe the very shallows just adjacent to the water, but they don't go much out of the water. Maybe just a few steps as they're flying in, they continue on land.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
I have a question. Oh, by the way, very, very, I like the comprehensive approach. It was great. We got to see or hear about everything, all aspects of the trip. But you did mention some historic sites. Were there some places on land where there's been some, exploration or landing in Shackleton or something along those lines?
Yes. So there's lots of, and this is actually our second trip to Antarctica. We went 2015 with an old sailboat, the bark Europa, which is 100. Oh, is it 100 feet? No, it's more. It's 150 feet, 1909 built sailing ship. If you Google it, that makes for beautiful photographic backdrops as well. There's lots of camps from previous explorations, still active explorations, where you see very basic like habitats, and Then they'll mention mostly from Shackleton's time. You get to hear all the Shackleton stories, and it's a great place to read the book. And then they'll tell you that's where they came through on their way back, or that's where that ship met that part of the party. So they'll tell you all those histories. And then there's the Ukrainians, for example, have a base. I'm blanking on the name. Port Lockroy is an English base that we visited. They're all in the northern part of those straits. And they're usually parts of all those excursions. So I would say on the regular trip to Antarctica, about a third of the landings you get to see either active or historic sites of where people have explored. One place we didn't go this time, but it's a place most excursions will go to, is Deception Island, which was a huge whaling station. You will still see whale bones on land. You will still see parts of the factory. And if you Google it, it makes for really cool photos of like some of those factory ruins that are starting to fall apart. So very worthwhile seeing those as well.
Thank you.
Argon available for dry suits?
Say it again.
Was argon available for dry suits?
So no one used argon. It was not available on the boat. We used, I have to say, I thought about it the other day. I wasn't sure whether we dove air or 32%, but it worked perfectly okay. And especially together with the heater, but argon was not available as a separate gas. One thing maybe worthwhile mentioning is for snorkelers, you could actually rent dry suits. So there, they were not too finicky about, you have to be very experienced. So snorkeling, I thought that might be worthwhile mentioning, is open to pretty much anyone, and they will even help you get a dry suit and some undergarments.
And as far as the heated undergarment that you had, what brand did you get? Did you wear?
Yes, we used the Santee undergarment, and I think it's the 2.0 version. I will say a couple of things. First of all, the undergarment itself is absolutely fabulous. Even without the heater, it's super warm, and you can move around, you can get to your valves, and it's a lot more flexible than you would think it is. So it's a super warm undergarment in the first place. And then what you need to get is one of those inflators for your dry suit that also feeds the heating cable through. And then you need to have a 20 amp battery that you're going to put on your hip belt that you then connect to the outside, and on the inside you connect your heated undergarment. An additional option would be, which is pretty cool, we didn't do that, the Santee has cables that run through the arms, and they have gloves that you could plug into the same system that are heated too. Some people say they're very bulky in the first place and you lose a lot of dexterity, but it might be something I would possibly try next time around.
Okay, thank you.
And I thought, James Keller, you had your hand up?
I think, oh, good.
Yeah, I had a question. Did you see any other boats in that area where you were, or were you the only boat in that area?
Good question. So sometimes the boat crew would, every day the boat crew at 4 o'clock would report out what's the weather like, where are we going, what's the plan, because depending on the wind and the seas, they would change some of the plans. And sometimes they would show us like Ship Finder or whatever the program's called is, where you can see all the other boats. In the Wet LC, for the most of the time, we were the only boat, but you could see about 40 boats north of the Antarctic Peninsula. And when we did that trip first time around, where we spent most of the time up there, you would see another boat every once in a while. It's still solitude out there. You don't see anyone all day, but every once in a while you'll cross a boat or you see someone landing somewhere. So it's very solitary, but where we were, there was pretty much no other boat there.
So in case of an emergency, how long would it take to get rescued?
It's a very good question. So first of all, that was part of the safety drill in the beginning. Those boats had lifeboats that you would know from like the movies, where you sit in and they're like completely enclosed, and there's food available, and I think you can last a week or so in those. I think if so, the way it works, I imagine, is the boats that are nearby would, you know, go full speed to get to where the ship in distress is. And I would guess that would probably take about 12 to 20 hours because when we got out there overnight, we actually covered a lot of ground. So I think maybe 12 to 20 hours out. But there's a lot, all those boats have a lot of sort of safety built in, especially that ship that was a polar cruiser. I imagine it's probably hard for it to get in trouble in the first place. And then it has all those sort of additional layers of really nice boats that you get into that are completely enclosed, even if the weather is adverse. But I'm sure it would not make for a good experience. I will say, I think one thing to consider is medical emergencies. You are very far away from significant medical help. You know, all those boats have basic medications on board. There's a doctor on board. That doctor is very good at, you know, helping with all the common things, nausea, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But if you have a significant medical condition, I think that's another consideration for a trip like this. Or if you need an excuse, do the trip before you have a medical condition.
Did it have a helipad?
No, it didn't have a helipad.
Huh.
But, and I don't know, like, how would you get a helicopter down there? You probably would have to have a ship fairly nearby. And then they would have to winch someone off or so. But yes, not this ship, I don't think had the ability for a helicopter to land on it.
What's the season down there? It must be pretty short and probably what, midsummer their time or January?
Yeah. Very good question. So the season to go is their summer, which is our winter. And I think it roughly stretches from early December to about late February. And in early December, the more south you go, the more ice there is. And again, I just saw an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. I think the temperatures are as high in Antarctica as they've been in ever since we started measuring. So another reason to have an excuse to go is we don't know how quickly it's melting. But yes, the season is mostly December, January, and February.
Any other questions?
Anybody see any of the famous ice fish?
Oh yeah, the ice fish, we talked about it. I didn't see one. I don't think anyone's gotten a photo. There's that fish with the antifreeze blood.
Yeah,
I don't know the details as to what makes it so it doesn't freeze, but it made for a good story. But no, we didn't see one.
Unmuted.
How many dives a day did you actually get in?
As mentioned, there's, generally speaking, during the time that you're there, there's always two excursions. There's the morning excursion and an afternoon excursion. And weather permitting, they offer you to dive twice a day. I think Martina and I, in the beginning, the first dive was very cold because it was just, 33 degrees. We've never done anything like it. And we said, we just need to do a little less in the afternoon. And we snorkeled in the afternoon. And I think one other time we did an excursion in the afternoon. It was a little bit of a bust because it was very hot and we didn't see anything. So we dove, I think we were down there for about 8 days and we dove essentially 7 times 2 plus another 2. So we dove about 14 or 15 times. You get used to the cold, which is very interesting. So the first 2 or 3 dives, it's cold. It's mostly the face, and if you don't tuck in your hood nicely, you feel it around your neck. But then towards the end of the trip, it's like I didn't mind as much. Yes, after 40 minutes, you have a hard time moving your hands, but you start to feel better as you continue to dive. And then I think sometimes if there's too much swell, they will not let you dive. But there's at least 18 opportunities on a trip like this.
Would you try to dive more next time versus the snorkeling, or because of the love for splits, stay snorkeling? I'm imagining you don't really get to do the splits if you're on the dive.
You can do the splits after the dive. So what we
After,
oftentimes did is we would do a dive, and then sometimes even with the scuba unit still on the back and the wing just inflated, we do some splits. But most often we would just hand rig our tank and just be in the water with the camera another 10 or 15 minutes. So it's kind of cool. You definitely can do both. I think, especially since we've been to Antarctica once, just for above water excursions, this time around we really wanted to go dive. And next time, it's always hard to figure out, should I go on land? Because I might see something very cool on land. Like for exception on Deception Island this time around, I would probably go on land. I tried to take some nice photos of the old factories and some of the whale bones up close. But then you might see whale bones underwater, which is kind of cool too. So it's always a little bit of a like, what should we do? So you can get very neurotic about which, and then of course it's always Murphy's Law. You go on land and the people underwater saw a leopard seal, and you're like, darn it. So there's a little bit luck of the draw. I would probably mix it up a little bit more having been there, but that said, we love to dive, so at the end we probably end up in the water more often than not.
thanks.
Very cool. Marc, thank you very much for sharing all of this stuff. The pictures are spectacular. I love the icebergs. They're just amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you,
And
Marc.
it was a great pleasure. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to share my email. I don't know what the best way to do it is, but if you have any questions about gear or anything, I'm more than happy to help if it helps you. So please don't be shy. And maybe Paul, if we can share the email, please feel free to get in touch. Seriously.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, let me know and I can hook you up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate the presentation. We are now going to move to the mini comp. And as I mentioned earlier, you're welcome to stay, but definitely don't have to feel like you need to. It's late on Friday night. All right. So let me actually, let me stop your sharing and then I will get the mini comp photos up. And let's see, I need to share my screen. Sure. All right, you guys should be able to see a photo now.
Yes.
Excellent. The theme for August was tiny fish. I will go through the photos. Oh, and I forgot to get the link. So let me do that. Send. I'm going to put the link in the chat if I can. All right, hold on. Okay. There we go. Now it's in the chat. You should be able to click on that and vote. All right, back to here. And one more time, share. There we go. All right, you should be able to see it again. So this is picture number 1. Picture number 2. Picture number 3. Picture number 4. Picture number 5. Picture number 6. And picture number 7. And I think that's all of them. Yeah, that's all of them. I will whip through them one more time. You can vote at any time. Just click the link and go for it. Picture number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Go ahead and vote.
Where's the? Huh. Oh, here it is.
Okay, which one did you vote for?
I did one.
Huh?
So, yeah, we have 2 people here. Can I vote twice or what do you?
Yes,
want
you can submit another entry.
to do?
Okay, so which one did you vote for? Which one did you vote for? Okay,
Don't tell us, Helga.
Yeah, yeah.
no,
let's-
I just asked you.
The secret ballot.
Jim, put your number on your knee.
No. Yeah,
Alan?
All right. Has everybody had a chance to vote who would like to vote?
Nope, not yet. Hold
Okay.
on.
Pick a good one.
Actually, I lost the chat for a second there.
All right. Did it work now?
Not
Okay.
No.
Do you
Why
want me
don't
to,
I just tell you?
you want me to text you
yeah,
the link?
just put it in the chat.
I know for some reason I can't find it this particular time. I see team chat, but
Yeah, that's
not
it.
it.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I clicked on it and
If you scroll to the bottom, it should have the link down there.
oh, wait. Okay.